The mending shop sat at the edge of Teller's Creek, where the main road thinned before open country, past the livery, past the last of the storefronts, past a long stretch of scrub grass that nobody had found a purpose for. Josephine had run it there 6 years, clothing worn through at the knees and elbows, feed sacks, harness leather, anything brought to her that had enough left in it to be worth saving. Quilts in the window when she had them finished. The town knew where to find her when they needed her. The rest of the time they left her alone, which was what she wanted and what they had come to understand. Every evening she sat on the porch with a candle burning on the rail. She was there when the rest of the town had already gone inside, there in the cold and there when the air still carried the last of the summer heat, the flame small and steady in its worn tin holder beside her. In bad weather she moved it inside to the east window, where it burned until she went to bed. The town had stopped asking about it years ago. It was simply part of the edge of Teller's Creek the way the scrub grass was, and the road going out into the dark beyond it. He came into the general store on a Wednesday morning and set a saddle strap on the counter. It had been repaired twice by men who had not known what they were doing and was starting to make that plain. The woman behind the counter picked it up without being asked. She turned it over, ran her thumb along the seam where the second repair was already pulling away from itself, and set it back down. She looked at him, taking her time, not hurrying toward a conclusion. "Working out of the Aldrin Ranch," he said. "Name's Cooper." Lydia Hale. Her hands settled flat on the counter. "You want this done right? Ride out to the shop on the east road. Past the livery, where the road opens up. Woman there works leather." A pause. "She keeps to herself. Do not expect much in the way of conversation." Cooper reached for the strap. Lydia's hands stayed where they were. "Her name is Josephine Calloway." She held his eyes when she said it. "Lost her husband and her little boy 4 years ago. Fever, both of them, same week. She has run that shop alone since." A breath. "Town looks out for her best it can. She does not always make it easy. That is her right." Cooper picked up the strap. "Obliged." He rode out the next morning. The shop sat back from the road behind a covered porch, leather and fabric stacked in clean order through the window, a quilt half finished in the frame near the door. He knocked. A woman came out, looked at him, took the strap from his hand and turned it slowly, feeling for what had been done wrong and how far the damage had traveled. She named a price, told him 4 days, said the work would be right, or he would not owe her anything. "Much obliged." She went back inside. He turned toward the road. On the porch rail the small tin candle holder sat in the morning light, worn smooth at the base, empty at this hour, waiting for evening the way it had been waiting every morning for 4 years. He had been working the Aldrin property since early summer, sleeping in the bunkhouse, riding into town most evenings for a drink before heading back east. The road ran past Josephine's shop both ways, and he had seen her every time. Not just the candle, but her, sitting alone on the porch in the dark, with the flame on the rail beside her, and the rest of the town long since gone inside. He had thought at first it was simply habit, the way some people take air before bed. But a woman did not sit out every night in all weather, with one small candle burning, unless it meant something she had not told anyone. The saloon on one of those evenings was loud. Hands from a ranch 2 counties north filling the back corner, the kind of noise that fills a room and spills into every conversation, whether it is wanted or not. Cooper was at the bar when the man beside him leaned over with the look of someone who has just made a connection he finds worth sharing. "You rode for Hatch County, did you not? 2 seasons back." He did not wait for an answer. "Gray Stallion. That course up past the ridge that nobody wanted to run." He shook his head slowly. Sawyer's the name. I heard about that race from 3 different men who were there. Said you took that horse through a stretch that the other riders would not even look at. Said you won by enough that there was not much to talk about after." Cooper looked at his drink. "Heard you ran again after that," Sawyer went on. "Different county, different horse even, and still nobody came close." He settled back on his stool with the satisfied look of a man who has put something together correctly. "Man who can ride like that, doing fence work at the Aldrin place." He was not saying it unkindly. He was genuinely puzzled by the arithmetic of it. Cooper set his glass down and left enough coin on the bar to cover it. He rode back east. The candle was burning on her rail when he passed. Josephine sat in her chair beside it, hands in her lap, eyes on something down the dark road that was not there. She did not look toward him as he went by. He came back for the strap on the 4th day. Josephine came to the door, moving with the careful stillness of a woman keeping a fever at arm's length through the force of having work in front of her. The strap lay on the counter, finished. The seams tight and even, the leather treated, the repair done so cleanly it made the 2 previous jobs look like what they were. He picked it up, ran his thumb along the seam. "This is good work." She looked at the strap, and then at him with the expression of a woman who had said it would be. He paid her and left. That evening he skipped the saloon and rode straight back along the east road. He slowed as he came level with her shop. The porch was dark, no candle, no figure in the chair. From somewhere inside came a cough, low and rough, the sound of something that had been working for days. He sat on his horse, looked at the dark rail. Then he turned back toward town. Lydia was still at the general store, the lamp low over the open ledger. She looked up when the door came open. Cooper turned his hat in his hands. "Josephine Calloway? Just rode past. Her porch is dark and she's coughing bad. Thought you ought to know." Lydia was already closing the ledger. "I will go this evening." He rode back east. Passing her shop, the porch was still dark, but through the window just visible the warm movement of a lamp carried from one room to another. Lydia was already there. She stayed 3 days, arriving each morning, leaving each evening, doing what needed doing without making a thing of doing it. She had done this before, 4 years ago, under worse circumstances. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. On the 4th, Josephine was at the workbench when she arrived and said she did not need to keep coming. Lydia put her coat on, stood at the door with her hand on the frame, looking out at the road rather than back into the room. "A man came to me the other night." A pause. "Said you sounded sick. Said someone ought to check in on you." A breath. "It was Cooper, from the Aldrin Ranch. I expect you already knew." The door swung shut. Josephine stood at the workbench and looked at it a moment. Then she set the piece in her hands down and went to the window. The road outside was gray and empty in the morning light. The candle holder sat on the porch rail where it always sat, waiting for evening the way it always waited. She stood at the window a while before she went back to work. Cooper came along the road from the direction of the ranch that Thursday afternoon with the day's work behind him. As he drew level with her shop, he heard it. A man's voice carrying that flat patience of someone who has already decided how a conversation is going to end. Josephine stood in the doorway with a finished piece of leather in her hands, her shoulders set, her voice level. The man wanted to pay less than they had agreed. He was not loud about it. He was simply applying the steady pressure of a man who believes a woman alone will give in before he gives up. Cooper brought his horse to a stop on the road. He looked at Josephine. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Not loud, not pointed at the man. Just a question from the road, in the easy tone of someone who has all afternoon and is simply checking. The man turned around. He took in the horse, and Cooper sitting it, and the fact that the question had not been aimed at him at all, which was somehow worse than if it had been. He looked back at Josephine. He looked at the leather in her hands. Then he put his hand in his pocket and counted out what he owed and set it on the rail and walked off down the road without another word. Josephine watched him until he was gone. Then she looked at Cooper. "Have you eaten?" He looked at her a moment. Then he swung down, tied his horse to the porch rail, and sat on the step to wait. She made biscuits and kept to practical things: the shop, the cold coming in, the east road after the last rain. He answered what he was asked and let the silences sit. She poured his coffee without asking if he wanted it. The lamp threw amber light across the table between them, and outside the town had settled into its nighttime quiet. After a while, Josephine set her cup down. She looked across the table at him. "Lydia told me it was you, the night I was sick." His cup turned once on the table. "Figured it was her business to go, not mine." She was quiet a moment. Then she got up and refilled both cups, and they talked a while longer. The work backed up in the shop, the weather turning, the fence line along the creek. Eventually he stood and took his hat from the table where he had set it and moved to the door. "Thank you for supper." "Good night, Cooper." He went out. She stood in the doorway and listened to his horse move off down the road until the sound was gone. The candle on the rail burned in the still air, the only light left on that end of town. She stood with it a while before she went inside. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He was not a man who filled silence with himself, who reached for words when a room went quiet, as though quiet were something requiring correction. Josephine noticed this early and kept noticing it. He never arrived without a reason and never stayed past the point where his presence had earned itself. He was not performing anything. That was what she kept coming back to on the evenings after he had gone, the particular relief of a man who was simply what he appeared to be. One evening over supper she asked him about the races, plainly without apology for having heard. His eyes moved to the window and came back. "Good work for a while." His cup turned in his hands. "I do better with work that starts and ends in the same day, without a crowd gathered around either end of it." She looked at him. The riding or the crowd? He was quiet a moment. "Both, I expect." He set the cup down. A crowd changes what a thing is, even when the thing itself stays the same. He did not say more than that, and she did not ask him to. But she understood it sideways through what was not said as much as what was. A man who had been very good at something very visible, and had decided that visibility was not the same as a life. She thought about that after he left. She thought about the candle on the rail, which nobody had ever watched her light except the empty road, and which had meant everything to her precisely because of that. October came in cold and fast. The Aldrin season wound down, and Cooper took on work at a smaller operation closer to town, fencing mostly, quiet work that started at first light and finished before dark. He stayed later at Josephine's most evenings. Neither of them remarked on it. One evening he arrived to find her struggling with a length of stiff canvas, a commission from the feed merchant that had come in late, needed cut and marked before morning. He sat across from her at the workbench and held the canvas flat while she worked. Neither of them talked much. The work went faster with 2 pairs of hands. When it was done, she made coffee and they sat at the table. He told her about a young mare at the smaller ranch. Skittish still, not yet decided about the people around her. The kind of animal that needed time and no pressure. Josephine listened and thought about several things she did not say. Then one evening, not long after, she was finishing a piece at the workbench while he sat nearby, and the shop had settled into its late quiet. She was not looking at him when she spoke. "People have been careful with me for a long time." She kept her eyes on the leather in her hands. "I did not know how much I minded it until you weren't." She set the finished piece aside and reached for the next one. The evening continued the way it had been going. Neither of them made more of it than what it was. but it sat in the room after she said it, and they both knew it did. One night she looked up from the workbench and realized she could not have said how long he had been there. Not because she had forgotten he was present, but because his presence had stopped registering as something separate from the room itself. She looked back down at her work. She thought about it later, lying awake, the candle long since burned out on the rail. Lydia watched him ride out the East Road in the evenings and kept whatever she thought about it to herself. It was a Tuesday evening late in October, cold enough that she had her shawl around her shoulders. He had come for supper and they had ended up on the porch without either of them deciding to. Him on the step below her chair, the candle on the rail, the town quiet down the road. The quiet between them was the kind that does not ask anything of either person. He looked at the candle, then at the road. "You light it every evening?" Not quite a question. Josephine looked at the flame. The cold air was still and the flame stood straight. "Jessie used to read to our boy in the evenings." She did not look at Cooper when she said it. "By candlelight, the three of us on this porch in the warm months. Inside at the east window, when it turned cold." The fringe of her shawl moved between her fingers. He had a voice for it. Slower than how he talked regular. Like the stories deserved to be taken that way. A breath. They both went in the same week, 4 years ago this past spring. Down the road a door opened and closed, and the night went quiet again. I did not see a reason to stop putting it out. Cooper sat with that. He did not reach for words to set beside it or soften it or make it easier than it was. After a while, he picked up his hat from the step, turned it once in his hands, and set it back down. They stayed there until the candle burned low. Then he stood and touched his hat and went to his horse, and she listened to him go from her chair without moving. Some evenings on from that, she was at the wash basin after supper when she heard his chair push back from the table. She thought he was getting his hat. Then the door opened, and she looked up, and he was not in the room. She dried her hands and came to the door. He was standing on the porch with his hat in his hand, not sitting, as though he had stepped out and then stopped. The candle burned on the rail. He turned when he heard her at the door and looked at her a moment in the low light. "I can go." His hat was still in his hand. "Or I could sit with you a while, if you would rather." She looked at him standing there in the dark, not pushing, not assuming, giving her the full weight of the choice without putting a thumb on either side of it. "Sit," she said. He came and sat on the step below her chair. Neither of them spoke much. The flame burned on the rail, and the town moved through its last sounds somewhere down the road. A door, a horse, things going quiet, one by one. After a long while she said good night, and he stood and touched his hat brim and went to his horse. He did not look back at the candle, but he was slow about leaving. November came in gray and still. He had settled into a pattern the town had noticed and mostly left alone. Work in the mornings, Josephine's in the evenings, the candle on the rail between them, until the cold drove them inside for the last of the coffee. The fencing work at the smaller ranch had become something closer to permanent. The owner had said as much one morning without ceremony, and Cooper had nodded and gone back to work. He had not mentioned it to Josephine, but he thought about it on the ride over that evening, and the evening after, and the one after that. One of those evenings she was at the workbench when the lamp began to go low. She reached toward the shelf for the oil without looking up from her work. Cooper was closer. He reached across and found the tin without looking either, the way you find something in a room you have been in long enough that your hand knows where things live. He set it beside her and went back to his chair. Neither of them said anything about it. She finished the piece she was working on. He stayed until the coffee was gone. He rode back in the dark, and she stood in the doorway after, and thought about his hand finding the oil without searching, and about how quietly a person could become part of a room before anyone dared call it belonging. She was at the workbench the next morning, a harness strap pulled through both hands, feeling for the place where the leather wanted to give when she heard him come through the door. He stood in the middle of the shop with his hat in both hands, not leaning on anything, not filling more space than he needed. Josephine set the strap on the bench. He looked at her the way he did when he had something to say, and had already decided to say it. "I have spent a long time moving." The hat was still in his hands. "Never much bothered me. Never had a reason to stop that was stronger than the reason to go." His eyes stayed on hers. "I have one now. And I think you know what it is." A breath. "I would like to stay, Josephine, as your husband, if you will have me." The shop was quiet around them. Outside, the wind moved once through the scrub grass and settled. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the harness strap down on the bench. Slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when your hands have just found something more important to do. And she turned to face him fully for the first time since he had come through the door. "Then stay," she said. He let a breath go, long and slow, the breath of a man setting something down on solid ground at last. That evening she was at the workbench finishing a small leather repair, the lamp low, the last stitches placed with care because the last stitches are what hold. Cooper sat nearby in the way he had of being present without requiring anything from a room. She set the work down, smoothed it once with her palm, looked at him. "Would you light the candle?" she asked. Cooper went still. He sat with the weight of what she had handed him, the fullness of it, everything it contained. And then he stood and went out to the porch. She heard the strike of the match, one clean sound in the quiet of the evening. She took her time, folded the leather, set it square on the bench, wiped her hands on the cloth, stood. She went to the door. He was on the step below her chair, with his forearms on his knees, looking at the flame. The candle burned steady on the rail. The air still, the November cold settled in around the porch and the road and the long stretch of scrub grass going dark beyond the reach of the light. She came out and sat in her chair. A door closed somewhere down the road. The last light had been gone from the western sky for an hour. She looked at the flame. He looked at it too, for Jessie, who had read the stories in the slower voice, for the boy who had fallen asleep listening, his weight going gradually heavier against his father's side until it had to be carried to bed. For the 4 years she had sat here alone and kept the light going because some things you keep doing, not because the hurt in them leaves, but because the thing itself is worth more than the hurt. Cooper knew. She had told him, and now he knew. Not as a fact, but as something he was sitting inside of, on the step below her chair, his shoulder near her knee, holding it the way he held everything she had given him, without making it smaller, without asking it to be anything other than what it was. The flame held against the dark. The town went quiet around them. A horse somewhere, a door, the last sounds of a night settling into itself. The cold air lay still across the porch and the rail and the road beyond it, and they sat together with all of it, with Jessie, with the boy, with the 4 years, with the life that had come quietly, and sat down beside all of it, without asking a single thing to move. Neither of them spoke. The candle held, and that was enough.